Good evening. This is a floral arrangement in a Bible at the Columbia Baptist Church in Falls Church, Virginia. And today I want to talk about the Bible and the teachings of the Bible and sexual morality and to some extent gender. Um, and lay down what I think it really says in relevance to all the other discussions I've had in my books. And it makes some of this is you can easily run around in circles, and some of this might not what everybody would like to hear, but I want to go through it. Um, First of all, well, let's go back to high school, 11th grade, when an English teacher we were learning. Remember that you learn American literature in 11th grade, typically in English class. Made us read a lot of Puritan literature in the early part of the year, and we wondered why their religious rules were so strict. And the teacher, who was an unmarried woman, um, in the 1950s, said, "Well, the living conditions were just very hard, and people had to be very disciplined about things for them to survive as a group." And that was probably why they interpreted the Bible the way they did. Now, there was Calvinism and various parts. You already had the Reformation, and you had Calvinism, which is very strict, and Catholicism. And it's also true that, Christianity, all the forms of Christianity, and I grew up as a Baptist, by the way, at First Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., which is both American and Southern conventions. All forms of Christianity depend on the Old Testament too, and Judaism, and the law, the Ten Commandments, and various other interpretations that developed throughout the stories in the Old Testament before the New Testament. So they all depend on that too. I just want to make that very clear that Judaism is very important to our whole Western civilization, as is Christianity, which enveloped it and became much more numerous in the number of people who practice it throughout history. Um, so um, let me also introduce another idea. Let's remember that when you're thinking about the rules of how people should behave themselves, there's a couple of things. First of all, we're talking about individual behaviors as individual um, adult men and women, and of course, minors growing up to being adult men and women in the biological sense. Um, I'm not aware that the Bible talks about gender identity as such anywhere. So we're talking about basic biological reality, and you're not guaranteed to be born in a particular time and place that has a liberal society like we've developed, where you can easily absorb, or you think you can easily absorb, other kinds of lifestyles and allow a lot more personal liberty in how one expresses one's own personal agency as an adult. You can't guarantee being that you won't be born into an authoritarian society, or that your society won't become authoritarian as ours is in danger of becoming, or that you won't have war, or that you won't have adversity, or some natural disaster, or any number of other things. You don't get to choose the purposes you're born under. And so the rules really are set up to make it so that you will fit in, even in a society, if it's very stressed, if it's very tribal, and if it's something that's very concerned about the tribe's survival, or it's a small country, or the country's survival when it's being attacked, that kind of thing. So your behavior has to be able to adjust to very trying circumstances, and sacrifice and hardship, not just having a good. So that's one of the reasons that they are put that way. Now, I will also add that recently I've been seeing a lot of videos about reincarnation, and the idea that many people have a number of reincarnations, And then there's a particular one that's the last reincarnation, and then they are forever in their final place in the heaven or wherever, whatever that is, in domains beyond the physical domains of the universe, is living forever um, with the angels or something. In other words, essentially heaven, and that they're the people you see in near-death experiences and so forth. It's not clear because the literature varies so much from source to source. It's not clear if everyone goes through that or if only some people do, which is, I think, is more likely. And how many and whether most people that report being people report relatives and NDEs are still only in the same life. Probably they would be. But the people do get to say, some people claim that when you go from reincarnation to reincarnation, you get to choose, you have what kind of environment you'll be in and what kind of parents you'll have. So that's a caveat. Maybe you do sometimes get to choose. We don't know for sure. I've never stayed at the Monroe Institute. I've thought about it sometime in south of Charlottesville, Virginia, but someday maybe I will if I live long enough. It would be interesting to get into these things, remote viewing and all of that. Um, but that leads us then to what if you go back to the New Testament to Christianity, and we'll mainly focus on Christianity and other religions that are conservative religions have similar reasoning. I won't cover Islam, but Islam has its own world. But the reasoning for some of the strict laws may be very similar. Um, that is to say, a lot of attention is focused on what they call the clobber passages for homosexuality. And let me just also mention, if you have reincarnation, you could bring up the idea that it's your soul gendered, and that you can imagine what people could do with that if that was true. But I don't know of any evidence that anybody seriously maintains that. But let me get back to this. One of the more visible passages is probably in 1 Corinthians. I've got the um, a new Bible here. I've shown it before with text in red, but this is just writing. So turning to it. Um, 1 Corinthians 6, of course, has a verse that seems to condemn people who abuse themselves with mankind, or depending on what translation you have, essentially seems to condemn people who commit homosexual acts, or at least acts which are completed, where, let's say, you could say bodily fluids are exchanged. But it seems also the Bible, you get to chapter 7, and Paul is saying that maybe it's better for a lot of people to be single than even attempt to marry and have children. And then that seems very strange because in many parts of the world, particularly Russia and now Hungary, Hungary just is considering a law now to ban all gay pride parades or completely and photograph people who go to them and so forth. It already has a ban on showing literature to people under 18. Some of these countries are very concerned that men and women will, because they're exposed to gay literature, will not want to have children because they're with the lower birth rates, even though there are economic reasons for that. So that's one of the reasons. And that kind of idea used to be popular. And it was when I was in college, when I was expelled, that seemed from William and Mary in 61. It seems to be coming back in the international area. Something that Trump could latch onto, I'm quite concerned about. And it could lead to, forced, adult verification. I've talked about that before. But Paul believes it's better might be better to be a single person as long as you're totally devoted to the Holy Spirit and God. But other times, I think he said that it's better, they say it's better to marry than to burn or something. But if you do have sex, you should be having children and raising a family. And obviously, society, an organized society, needs to have most of its people over time willing to do that. Now, there's a thing about the Bible does seem to accept the fact that some men, particularly and women, are not as disposed to have children as others. It doesn't seem to criticize people for not being disposed to have your own children. And it seems that, in fact, the love chapters, I think it's chapter 13 in 1 Corinthians, and the passages in Matthew and Luke particularly, encourage to be respectful and even welcoming to people who don't follow the laws as you think they are exactly. And we know that there's plenty of statistical evidence that suggests that boys, that are born farther in the birth order are more likely to be gay. And there's some studies at NIH about very slight brain differences between gay men and straight men, and also trans. And the differences for trans are not quite the same as the differences for gay. I think I've covered that one time before. There are some differences among the groups, which is not very practical to screen for or anything, but they do seem to exist. With lower population, fewer children, that could mean there would be fewer gay men, proportionally, in the future than there have been, because there wouldn't be as many elder-born male children that might have the epigenetic influence of not maybe as much testosterone before birth. And by the way, normally when men go through puberty and become gay men, as I've said before, normally most of them have the complete athletic ability and strength and coordination of all other men. Usually, I did not, but usually people do. I just want to make that clear. Now, there have been some near-death experiences reported on YouTube, various channels. I think there's one called Return Souls or something, but where both lesbian and gay men in gay marriages. And by the way, gay marriage is a way to give gay couples a chance to raise families, possibly by surrogacy or by adoption. Surrogacy is morally controversial to some people, and adoption has also been an issue in some states, but it gives same-sex couples a chance to participate in sharing the responsibility for raising families. So you should say that. But many of these NDE experiences, some of them have been very negative and have said that people during their NDEs have claimed that they were told that they had sinned, that they had to give up their partners and follow Christ exactly and obediently. And that it's very strange that Jesus is the Savior, but it's very strange that you would demand this out of people in such an authoritarian way. I mean, Jesus is often portrayed in literature as a very attractive young adult male in his early 30s. I think that's ironic for a gay man to contemplate. And yet you're supposed to obey him and no one else. And it's an authoritarian demand, and you can be condemned if you don't. That's hard to understand why it would be that way. And that also explains why people try to convert other people. People proselytize. People feel like they have to convert others to their religion to save them. But there's another aspect to this which is real important, is sacrifice. We all, have different levels of hardship in our lives. And sometimes where people, young men particularly, can be conscripted into war. We don't have a draft right now, but the idea of conscription itself is one of the most controversial morally in a society that wants to be democratic. I don't think Trump is for letting women register for have to register for selective service, by the way. I think he's against it. But even though we're not drafting now, the men are expected to protect women and children, which puts us a burden on men that happen to be less, by accident, just happen to be less genetically endowed to be real physically strong and physically competitive. That's part of what drives some of the gender ideology, I think, in practice. We talked about that before, I think. But that when somebody is killed in war, they're killed on D-Day, we honor their sacrifice. But sometimes being part of a forced sacrifice is not very honorable. For me, if you were caught in a hostage situation and your life was bargained against somebody else's, and you were saved and somebody else wasn't, that wouldn't be very honorable. And I would think it would be better. I could say that it would be better to give up your life and end it than allow yourself to be a hostage. But the Bible also implies that if you end your own life, it's over. You probably don't get any more chances to be saved. So it sounds like you have to play even in that case. So one idea might be ego death, that you accept that it's your turn to make a sacrifice. So you give up your ego, and if you are reincarnated, you start over at the bottom again. That might be one way it works, so that we understand that sacrifice is real, and that you can't have an organized society without sometimes calling on some people to sacrifice. Some people want, the prejudice we find that we used to have against gay men particularly, and now we're against trans today. A lot of people just don't want to feel they'll be forced to associate with people that they don't approve of, that would bring them down. And yet there's something about my own thinking, the upward affiliation, which I call it, which was exciting to me when I was young, to be associated with somebody that was bigger and stronger than me, that would lead to arousal and desire, But that sounds like a trap, if everybody did it, it could lead us back to fascism, and it actually would imply that I should be willing to invite people who are more disadvantaged than I am to partnership with me, rather than feeling ashamed of being associated with them and not having association with somebody stronger. That's and you think about where that leads in our society, and how that can lead back to authoritarianism if everyone did it. So, was looking. Oh yeah. The other thing that strikes me when Paul says, it's up. You're supposed to, if you are someone who doesn't marry and devote yourself to God, that sounds like the Catholic priesthood, doesn't it? And we all know that that's gotten into trouble, not letting priests marry, what that's led to sometimes. But Paul's suggesting that maybe you don't have as right to as much personal agency on your own if you don't have your own children as men who do, which was a very big issue for me. I worked more hours than people who were married, was paid the same when I was working back in the 90s. That was a big issue, the relative level of sacrifice. Maybe you should. In many societies, that sort of recognizes gay men as a third sex or something, expect them to become warriors or expect them to become caregivers. but not go out on their own and compete with people who do have children. And Paul seems to be implying that if you don't have your own children, you should live in some kind of communal setting where you share income, almost like an intentional community or something like that, with income sharing. And maybe the world needs to be organized that way, rather than being organized around money the way it is now. Include social credit as part of money or something like that. I don't know. That sounds like it's leading back to communism, but not exactly. I mean, I don't know. That's why you start running around in circles. You have a horseshoe effect. That authoritarianism, the magnetism, communism, and fascism start becoming almost the same thing. At the end, when you have to become very collectivized. I just wanted to also mention before I close up, I saw the movie October 8th, last Saturday, Angelica Mosaic. And the whole idea again of, what happened on October 7th, that many people were kidnapped and the hostage negotiation going on. That's part of my thinking that bothers me now, what you're hearing about. But one of the things was that the protesting from the left and had turned against Israel for colonizing, and the whole history of anti-Semitism going through several stages. Hitler was one of the stages. So people don't really understand that in the Middle East, there are many more parts of the Middle East that are hostile to Israel than just Gaza and the West Bank. There are all these other countries that many of them are very hostile, Iran and so forth. So it's not really what people think it is. The people that are protesting, and people get the far left protesters get angry when you even mention the people who were massacred on October 7th were victims, and seized as hostages, that they think that they don't have any rights at all because somehow Israel is a colonizer. You know what has been going on, the controversy. And that sounds completely wrong, because the bigger picture is the entire Middle East has many more hostile areas, and Israel, I don't want to get into this too much, but of course, the history of the Bible is, of course, Jews were in that area that is Israel today and Palestine and so forth, and throughout the history from the 13 or 1400 years of history before Christ, were there before and were in Jerusalem before, and, returning to Jerusalem was a big deal and everything in your history. So even that doesn't even sound right from a philosophical way to me. So I didn't want to get into that too much, but I saw that movie and I thought I had to mention it. But again, the biggest thing for me, people don't like it when I go out and film something, a protest, and I'm not protesting myself. Who are you to think you're above associating with us and not vulnerable to the same things we are, or they may be mad because I'm presenting one point of view and giving it credibility when I don't have any personal skin in the game. I don't have my own children, my own legacy, or my own lineage. That's right, my own lineage. And I don't have any legitimate reason to be in part of the debate. Just somebody's retired and everything, and that I should be marching with them and join them, and their oppressor versus oppressed and so forth. And I'm oppressor, I guess. And again, this whole thing about the way you interpret these rules in the Bible is about yourself as an individual, that you may have to live in many different kinds of situations. If the reincarnation model is true, and if people go through many reincarnations, they'll have to live in many different situations, and some of them won't be liberal, some of them will be authoritarian, will be really primitive, and will involve war and hardship, sacrifice, and disease. And you'll take your turn at it. And yet sometimes some people may have to take more turns at it than others have to, because of the whole idea that you need to have sacrifice sometime. So it's a big picture. And it kind of turns on itself a little bit. But that's what I wanted to talk about today. It's a very serious topic with me. And I do thank you for listening.